All right, well, let's get the webinar kicked off here. Thanks everyone for joining us again on today's webinar, where we're going to be looking at the diameter signaling market. My name is Dan Meyer. I'm Editor-in-Chief here at RCR Wireless News. Thanks for joining us on, like I said, today's webinar. Today we're going to be joined by some experts in the field to talk a bit about the diameter signaling space, including, as you can see here on the slide, Greg Collins, founder and principal analyst at Exact Ventures, Bill Welch, who's a senior product manager at Sonus, and Kevin Summers, who's the senior director for mobile strategy at Mitel. Those guys are patiently waiting for me to finish up my part of the webinar, and we'll get to their insight as well on the webinar. But again, thanks everyone for joining us today. Today's webinar, just some quick housekeeping, will be about an hour long. We'll start off with, we'll give a quick overview of some insight that we gleaned from a report we're putting out. Should be available on our website, I think later on today, looking at the diameter space. And then we'll bring Greg on to provide some insight from what he's learned recently in terms of some analyst commentary he's done on, or analyst insight he's learned from the diameter space. So Greg will provide some insight there. Then we'll bring on Bill to provide a quick overview of Sonus and what they do in terms of the diameter space. Also Kevin Summers from Mitel as well. And then the plan is to leave the last half hour or so for the webinar for a roundtable discussion on the topic, as well as to invite those who are listening in to send in some questions on the topic as well, and I'll moderate those questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we can during the webinar. Also, we will try to speak as loudly and clearly as possible. I know occasionally we get questions from people about if we could speak up, and we'll try as best we can, obviously using various technologies. Sometimes it's a little difficult, but we'll do as best as we can. I also recommend that maybe check your audio settings too, just to make sure you've got your volume turned up as well on that end. But we'll do as best we can on this side here for getting it as clear as possible on our end at least. So let's see here. Next slide here. A quick little insight here about the RCR Wireless News for those who might not know much about us. We've been covering the wireless space here for looks like wow, for more than 30 years now. So anyway, since almost the beginning of wireless communications, but just a quick blurb there on RCR Wireless. All right, let's see, next slide. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'll provide a quick little overview on some of the insight from a story I put together on the diameter space, which, like I said earlier, can be downloaded from the RCR site. Should be on there, I think, later on today, so you can get some more insight there as well. And some of the commentary from our guests on the webinar today is also inside of inside of the report as well. So some good insight there. All right, let's see. Okay, so some quick topics there from the report. So obviously, I think many people know that diameter requirements are rising for diameter. That's kind of, I guess, going hand in hand with consumer demand for mobile services, which is continuing to rise. I think everybody's seen all the charts and been to enough events to notice that everybody's talking about the rising demand from consumers for data services, whether it's video services, over-the-top-like services, and obviously operators are moving more towards voice services as well with VoLTE, starting to handle some voice communications as well too. So, and carriers are increasingly looking towards diameter platforms to manage that demand on their networks. Some numbers that I got from for the report there. Obviously, from Infinetics, they released a report earlier this year looking at the signaling controller market increased 81% in 2014, hitting $381 million, with the market boosted by growing LTE network deployments and customer usage. The market is expected to grow threefold between 2014 and 2018, as you see, hitting multiple billions of dollars in revenues there as well. So again, consumer demand driving a lot of this growth in the market there. In 2014, as you can see, some of the top use cases for diameter that I've seen on the slide there, including roaming via diameter edge agents as well. North America was singled out as one of the largest markets for diameter signaling controller revenue, accounting for more than 1/3 of the market, with Europe, the Middle East, and Africa and Asia Pacific following in market size. Oracle put out a report actually very recently on the topic, looking at diameter traffic, expecting that they expect the surge from 30 million messages per second in 2014 to 395 million messages per second by 2019. So it's obviously a very significant increase expected in terms of signaling traffic over networks. Oracle had predicted that growth to be attributed to obviously the increased penetration of LTE services, and some of the top use cases that they cited included LTE broadcast, policy charging, and also VoLTE as being big drivers for what they expect to be a big increase in diameter traffic. All right. Obviously, like as I mentioned, this is also going hand in hand with the increased deployments of LTE networks and adoption by consumers. Some numbers here also, Global Mobile Suppliers Association, GSMA, has predicted that in 2014, there were 422 operators that had launched commercial LTE systems in 143 countries, with that number expected to rise to 460 commercial LTE networks by the end of this year. Those networks were supporting 755 million mobile connections at the end of last year, with more than half of those added over the past 12 months. The GSC also says it expects total LTE-based connections to hit 1 billion connections by the end of this year. So again, growing demand for LTE services, and as operators continue to roll out their networks and promote their LTE networks, again, a big increase in demand and driving growth there on the LTE networks. One thing that was surprising from the report as I was working on it, and obviously we're looking to focus mostly on diameter, but there were quite a bit of comments about the fact that operators are still looking for SS7, either enhancements to their SS7 platforms to support what they're seeing as I guess, continued usage of their 2G and 3G networks. Obviously, operators are looking to drive more data traffic growth on their LTE networks, but a lot of consumers, even in developed markets, still have 3G handsets. And in some of the developing markets, obviously 2G and 3G networks are still the predominant access method for data services. So a lot of operators are still looking to bolster their SS7 systems. And so a lot of it seems vendors were hearing from the carriers that they're looking for not just diameter platforms, but also enhancements to their SS7 platforms. So they're having to develop platforms that do both. Obviously. Work on diameter, but also to serve SS7 services as well. So still a lot of growth there in the SS7 market. It's not expected to continue to grow per se, but most of the vendors I talked to, some analysts were mentioning that they expect traffic on SS7 systems to remain pretty consistent over the next couple of years as operators look to support IoT and machine-to-machine services that are using a lot of those 2G and 3G networks. So interesting aspect or interesting comments coming out of the report. And I know some of our panel members here will be talking a bit about that a little bit later as well, so we'll get more insight there. One thing we looked at too was, I guess, what the demand was for VoLTE and pushing diameter traffic. I guess I was surprised a bit. I think I kind of went into the report expecting maybe more concern when it came to what VoLTE might be doing to diameter traffic. Because obviously I talked to some companies about this and some analysts, and they were mentioning that a single VoLTE call can require between 9 and 12 diameter session or signaling sessions just to set up a call. But what I found from talking to a lot of the vendors and analysts is that while there is expected to be a big growth in traffic from VoLTE, there was not a lot of concern at this point in terms of any potential signaling storms that could be caused by VoLTE. A lot of this seems to be because operators are getting a better handle on their diameter platforms and also a little more aware of how LTE is impacting their network. So it seems like those initial signaling storms that we saw with the rollout of LTE services in some markets have kind of been taken care of to this point, and there's not expected to be as big of an impact, at least potentially bringing down some networks in terms of VoLTE traffic on the network. So that was, I guess, heartening to hear that part as well. So. Another thing we looked at was the use of diameter as networks turn towards virtualization. We've been doing quite a bit of work here at RCR looking at the virtualization market in terms of NFV and SDN, and it seemed like diameter was somewhat tailor-made for virtualized deployments. A lot of companies I spoke with did say that they were looking at using virtualization, using VNS to deploy their diameter platform. So it seems like that is being worked on. Infinetics, obviously stating that they expect diameter signaling controllers to be implemented as a VNF beginning this year. So it looks like that's starting to happen. Perhaps North America and a few European operators are leading the charge there, but that seems to be one of the, I guess, deployment methods going forward. And I think, again, some of our analysts on our panel members here will have some more insight on that topic as well in terms of what we'll be looking at going forward with virtualization. IoT, as I mentioned earlier, obviously some uncertainty and opportunity there. At this point, people are still, expecting a lot from IoT and machine-to-machine. We've seen numbers out there from certain vendors expecting, 20 billion or 50 billion connected devices moving forward, and that could generate quite a bit of signaling traffic for the networks. At this point, it seems like a lot of these deployments are using 2G and 3G connections, which, again, kind of go back to the rise or the continued need to support SS7 platforms. But moving forward, it's expected that a lot of these will start to use LTE networks. Obviously, when it comes to the connected car space, we're starting to see a big increase there in terms of vehicles starting to embed LTE connections into those vehicles, and that's going to potentially drive a lot of new connection traffic going forward. And again, with a lot of those, connected car space, obviously latency is a big concern there when it comes to, what's going to be required from those cars if they start to see autonomous vehicles and various things like that. And so there could be some significant impact on diameter networks being able to handle both the increased traffic and also the latency issues when it comes to a connected car. So that'll be interesting, something to watch going forward. And obviously, too, as I mentioned at the last part there, new requirements in terms of billing and charging models. Again, operators are looking to be a lot more advanced and a lot more wide-ranging when it comes to their billing and charging models for their services. And so the diameter networks are going to have to really be able to handle a great increase or a significant increase in terms of what's being put pressure-wise from operators on what they need those systems to do. So a lot of uncertainty there and obviously opportunity going forward. All right, well, that was a quick overview of the report. As I said, you can get some more insight there from the report on our RCR Wireless website. You can download the report there. But I don't want to take up too much time. I want to get to our experts here to get some greater insight in the topic. So with that, I want to bring on Greg Collins, who, like I said earlier, is the founder and principal analyst there at Exact Ventures for some insight. Hey, Greg, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure, Dan. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here, and I'm happy to cover some of the findings that I have in my recent diameter signaling report that came out a couple weeks ago, and I also have a report on SS7 and STPs coming out later this week. So, lots going on in
lots
both
of good
segments.
insight there, definitely.
Yep.
Yes, indeed.
Thank
All
you.
right.
All right, so on to the next slide. So just a bit of an outline. Like Dan mentioned, the industry is seeing, sort of massive growth in signaling traffic due to LTE and VoLTE in particular. And again, Dan alluded to increasingly complex monetization and policy efforts. So you can imagine service providers want, very, very granular type of data plans and sponsored data, and all of that requires a lot of talking between billing systems and policy infrastructure and packet core and IMS. So that is driving a ton of diameter traffic, and I think that's been the primary use case so far. SDN and NFV, and we'll get into this a bunch later, but I think that's really driving a generational shift in network architectures. And while diameter is really well suited fundamentally to NFV because it's so compute intensive, it also is latency sensitive, and as a result, and it's mission critical. So as a result, service providers may be circumspect about deploying it until it's more proven. And again, diameter investments are starting to prompt demand for more converged signaling infrastructure, including SS7, including some SIP routing. And like we mentioned before, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, SS7 and SIGTRAN is certainly not going away. And even in the next few years, I see it as actually a growing market, given that subscriptions, 2G, 3G, are still growing in developing regions, and for some other reasons, which I'll get into a little bit later. So moving on to the next slide. This slide shows my forecast for the diameter signaling controller market. I track both products and services, and you can see, expecting very healthy growth, through 2020. Market definitely exceeding $2 billion in that time frame, and the market had very strong growth in 2014, and we've seen that pick up a little bit in 2015. The last report that I have covers the first half of 2015, and there we saw about a 47% increase compared to the second half of 14. So really strong growth there. And services and software maintenance are becoming a much bigger piece of the revenue pie for vendors out there. So I've started with this report, and it's slowly being rolled into my other reports that the services piece is a very important part to track. So you can see that growing a little bit faster than on the product side. So the products consist of both hardware and software, and services include things like professional services and software maintenance, installation, and that kind of thing. So again, very strong growth. Looking on the next slide, this slide shows the growth in diameter TPS, so that's the line, and in contrast to the growth in mobile data traffic, which are the bars. So Cisco has their VNI, and have a similar type of calculation. My numbers are actually a little bit lower than what Cisco is projecting as far as the growth in data traffic. You can see over the next 5 years, I'm expecting 47% CAGR, whereas signaling growing about 60% over that same time frame, and that will roll into those forecast numbers that I just reviewed on the last page. Just looking at smartphone subscriptions, again, smartphones have a lot of apps and a lot of and those apps are monetization tools for service providers and other folks, and that drives diameter traffic, as well as things like RCS that I think we'll start seeing more and more, video, and voice over LTE. So while in many regions pretty much everyone has a smartphone, in other parts of the world, developing parts of the world, smartphones are still fairly lowly penetrated. So even with just a 12% CAGR in smartphone shipments, by 2020, over the next 5 years, there'll be an additional 2.8 billion smartphones on operator networks. And again, this underpins a lot of the increase in diameter signaling traffic. So I thought that was really important to point out. So on the next slide, again, taking a look at LTE subscriptions, and again, Dan pointed out a lot of these numbers before, but so we're on track to approach 1 billion LTE subscriptions or connections by the end of this year, 2015, and I have that growing to about 3.3 billion in 2020. So even at 3.3 billion in 2020, that's still just a third of the worldwide LTE subscriptions. So the diameter market, even beyond 2020, has a lot of headroom as the remaining 2/3 of the market slowly gets converted to LTE. And the next slide takes a similar look at the market. You can see this is the total mobile subscriptions. You can see in 2020 the LTE, and that corresponds to the 3.3 billion that I talked about on the previous slide. But again, you can see the massive number of 2G, 3G subscribers that still exist. We have 3G subscribers. If you were to, and maybe I should have put this on the slide, separating 2G and 3G, but 3G subscribers, are continuing to grow through 2018. But in aggregate, the 2G, 3G have really peaking this year or next year. And that really speaks to one of the things that Dan mentioned earlier, was the STP SS7 markets continuing to be very important, and I have it being a growing market, not only because the traffic's increasing, but with the diameter investments, operators are looking at modernizing some of the legacy STPs, maybe TDM based, and having just a single signaling infrastructure that they want to to manage, and more are looking at this converged signaling infrastructure at being virtualized. And again, I think we're still at the early days of virtualization, and as Dan pointed out, a number of have operators. I think NTT Docomo has deployed a virtual DSC, and I know there's some in Europe as well that I think are relatively small deployments that focus on roaming. But again, this will be a big technology, not only for diameter signaling, but for many, many core networking functions going forward. So talking about use cases, again, we talked a lot about this before, but interconnector roaming is a very important use case for diameter signaling. Protecting network borders, similar to what session border controllers do, is a key use case. And some of the security features are things like topology hiding, and protecting from unauthorized network peers, such that all the network peers are configured manually. Things like message screening is very important, and so security has been a really key feature for diameter signaling. On the core routing side, policy or PCRF load balancing has been the core one, and I have that continuing to be a very important use case, going forward. Things like billing and protocol and AVP, which are attribute value pairs. I believe I got that acronym right. Normalization is also a key attribute. So moving on to the next slide, SDN and NFV. Again, I think the timing of it will take quite a while. I think we're hearing a lot about SDN and NFV, and a lot of the things we're hearing about are proof of concepts, and I think that's great. But again, this is a very generational shift, and I think it'll be fairly gradual. I think early applications will be of less latency sensitive applications, like certain M2M applications, and I think a lot of the NFV deployments will be of if an operator needs sort of extra capacity or sort of overhead capacity, they may say, okay, well, if we exhaust the capacity on sort of our PNF-based infrastructure, we'll have sort of the spillover occur in a VNF, and that's a way to sort of start introducing virtualization into the signaling world. Looking at the effect of NFV on business models, certainly traditional networking hardware revenues and associated support will dwindle, and software licensing and subscription models and software maintenance models will continue to become more and more important as traditional networking vendors become essentially software vendors. And looking at the next shift, again, DSC hardware-specific revenues could trend towards zero over time, and I think this, we're talking over the next decade as spending shifts to COT servers, and then as software revenues, I think we'll continue to see a lot of price pressure on the TPS or the MPS licensing. I have prices going down in the teens on a percentage basis over time, and then look toward some of the shift in the value going toward the nano layers, so the orchestration and the VNFI and the network orchestration layers as well. But again, that's all still coming, and it's all still very new. For service revenues, and looking at installation, so obviously if in a software role, the installation cost is pretty much would be zero, and hardware maintenance would get shifted toward servers or data centers and storage. But software maintenance becomes pretty important as vendors need to find a way to continually fix bugs and service the product in a software-only product. And then in an NFV world, the customer support relationships will really need to be defined, with multiple software layers and orchestration layers. Who is the one neck to choke when there's a problem, and how do you debug that problem, or how do you find bugs and fix them becomes a big issue. And I think there's still a lot of questions out there about how that's going to work. And just to finish things up, the diameter signaling market is we're still at the very early stages. You saw the trends in the LTE subscriptions, and with smartphones. So I think we have a lot of growth ahead of us. The diameter investments are prompting a lot of interest, I think, not just some, in converged signaling infrastructure, including SS7 and STP. And as I mentioned before, I think there's a window in the next 2-3 years for there to be a growing market as operators really look at modernizing some of their legacy signaling infrastructure. Some vendors have actually got out of the market. Cisco is one of them, and they'll stop supporting their products, I think, in 2017. So those operators with Cisco STPs, need to find some alternatives. And then lastly, before I hand it off to the next speaker, NFV I think is a generational shift. It'll be very gradual, and there's still a lot of work that has to get done on revenue and pricing models for the different vendors, as well as the service and support models between vendors and operators. So with that, thanks, and I look forward to your questions later.
That sounds good. Hey, Greg, definitely appreciate the insight there. Obviously, I think Greg already got the quote of the webinar with the next choke there. So it's a big part, I think, going forward, especially virtualization, a big challenge there. But great insight there, Greg, on the topic. And I did, obviously, and when you go back to the report that we put out, I didn't use a lot of numbers from Greg's report, only because I didn't want to, kind of take away from people maybe reading it. So I think people need to definitely check out his report, because the numbers in there are pretty amazing to look at. So I definitely recommend, obviously, look at our report too, but definitely take some time and go to the Exact Venture site and check out Greg's report on the topic, because a lot of great insight there, a lot of great numbers to check out in terms of the diameter market. So again, Greg, thanks for the insight there. We definitely appreciate that. And so now, before we go to bring up Bill to talk a bit about Sonus, I do want to remind those who are listening in that if you do have any questions for our panel members, you can use the questions tab there on the GoToWebinar control panel and type in the questions there. Like I said earlier, the plan is to kind of use the last half hour or so to go through some questions. We have some questions already prepared as well, but if you have some questions you have for our panel members, please feel free to use that questions tab there. And if you have a specific question for a specific panel member, just put their name in the question there. We can make sure we get to those too as well. So with that, I want to bring on Bill VoLTE now, who's the Senior Product Manager at Sonus, to talk a bit about the topic. So hey, Bill, thanks for joining us as well. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much. So just to introduce myself, I'm Bill VoLTE, Senior Product Manager from Sonus on the signaling products. I just want to do a quick history lesson here. So there was a company, Performance Technologies. They were around for, I think, close to 22 or 20 years. They had a very robust signaling business and also OEM hardware. They were selling, carrier-grade hardware off to the likes of larger solution providers. But in the last, essentially in 2014, Performance Technologies was acquired by Sonus. So now PT, now Sonus, and that legacy of over 15 years of investment, particularly on the SS7 STP side, is now being leveraged into Sonus. So moving on to the next slide. In the last month or so, we've done a webinar in conjunction with RCR Wireless, and we posed a question to the folks on the webinar. When do they plan to retire their SS7 network? And this was kind of a probing question, and it was after presenting some data that was publicly available out there in the world. And what it was an estimate coming from the GSMA, and they were basically saying that about 28% of the overall connections in the world will be LTE based as of 2020. And so what does that mean? Over 70% of the overall mobile connections in the world will be 2G and 3G based, aka SS7. So we wanted to get a view from the folks on the webinar how long they really expect their SS7 network to stick around. And so if you see here from the numbers from the limited polling we did, for the most part, almost 70% are predicting at least 2025 and beyond. And then several were basically talking at least 2030. So we're not talking about years. We're not talking about a decade. We're talking about potentially decades of the SS7 network kicking around. And as seen within the previous slides, those mobile network connections as far as 4G, 2G, and 3G really bear that the 2G and 3G is going to become a very long tail coming over multiple of decades. So coming here from Sonus, just a quick product splash here. So Sonus has a fully integrated combined diameter and SS7 SDP solution. And so we have two options. You can basically go about accessing our DSC 8000, which is a hardware-based DSC and SDP platform, or if you're looking for a virtualized and software-only option, we have our DSC SWE. And we have inner working between the diameter and SS7 side, and also I'm not going to list through them, but we have a host of particular use cases, applications, such as core router and DRA on the diameter side, and core SDP and signaling on the SS7 side. So these are the solutions that are available today from Sonus. So back to you.
Awesome. That's great, Bill. We definitely appreciate it. Like I said, Bill's going to join us here in a few minutes on our roundtable discussion to get some more insight there. But Bill, we definitely appreciate that insight. And again, if people have any questions for our panel members, please feel free to use the questions tab there on the GoToWebinar control panel. Get those sent in, and we'll try to get some of the questions here in the last half of our webinar here. With that, I want to bring on now Kevin Summers from Mitel to talk a bit about what Mitel is doing in this space, and then we'll jump on to our roundtable discussion. So Kevin, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. A quick note here to the folks on the bridge. If you're not aware of this, Mitel acquired Mavenir Systems back in April of this year, and Mavenir themselves had acquired Ulticom, and the diameter signaling product that we acquired via the Ulticom acquisition has been deployed throughout the world as an OEM element, as well as being directly sold out to service providers and the like. So that gives you kind of a history here, and I'm speaking from the perspective of the Mitel Mobility business unit. Mavenir, or now known as Mitel Mobility, sells all sorts of IMS infrastructure, completely software-based, completely virtualized, and pretty much my portion of the discussion here is very mobile-oriented. This gives you kind of a view of the evolved diameter signaling network, and this is probably best viewed through the lens of this is where you would expect to arrive once the LTE deployments have rolled out in earnest. Typically with rollouts of any new technology, you initially want to make sure that you have reach, right? And that's been the case that we've observed in the LTE rollouts that we participated in, as you can observe in the market. Once you achieve reach, then you want to increase depth. And then as you're able to increase coverage, depth, and capacity, then you can start to dial down some of those precursor technologies, 2G, 3G. I totally agree with Greg and others that it's going to be quite some time before 2G and 3G simply go away. Particularly critical for VoLTE deployments is that access transfer control function that facilitates the movement between 2G, 3G domains as well as 4G LTE domains. So a very critical piece that the DSC provides in terms of allowing network operators to scale their networks, very much similar to, if you think back how session border controllers were used in the early days, this reaches back 10, 15 years. Remember, SIP was very much an open protocol lots of opinions on how to implement certain aspects of SIP. SBCs played a critical role around interoperability, session control, security, and protocol normalization. One of the main functions that we see, main benefits, is around protocol normalization by the DSC of various different diameter implementations. Again, a handful of primary use cases. This really just echoes a lot of Greg's comments here. Primarily, we see the bulk of the deployments and the interest around the edge router use case. This is seen or used rather in your roaming cases, so primarily for LTE roaming. And then as VoLTE roaming kicks in, as it will eventually happen, becomes a very, very critical component there. Also, when you accommodate MVNOs into your mobile network, whether or not the MVNO brings to the party an HSS or some other diameter emitting piece of infrastructure, often you want to be able to insulate the rest of your network with that. Using the DSC. The centralized router really allows a certain level of indirection, right? You don't necessarily want to deploy massively flat networks. So over time, as deployments increase, you tend to see these networks evolve to much more hierarchical, and the DSC plays a pretty critical function there. And lastly, again, diameter SS7 gateway, very, very critical there. Very important function. A few key notes here around the DSC from Mitel. Just wanted to emphasize the scalability aspect of this. Maybe the most important thing to take away from this is that it's a fully software-based solution. I'd say the dominant number of deployments this year have actually been virtualized deployments, and so we've had some good experience around that. It's very interesting, even for a single operator that may traverse multiple properties across multiple countries. Often those different opcos have different opinions around virtualization and how they deploy. So we've made a lot of learnings there in that area.
All right. Awesome. Well, that's great. Well, hey, Kevin, definitely appreciate the insight there. I know we're going to touch on a lot of those topics that you brought up as part of this discussion as well, but some great insight there. And obviously, it sounds like from you guys that this is a space that is growing. I think we saw the numbers there from Greg as well. I mean, it's a market that's taken off, and a lot of insight there, a lot of excitement around it. I know we've got some questions coming in from our audience as well, so we'll try to get to those too. I will try not to destroy this webinar by going to the questions here, so bear with me on that. But I guess maybe kicking off the discussion here, and maybe, obviously, looking at, Greg, the chart that you showed there, I mean, it didn't really show an inflection point around, kind of end of this year into next year in terms of a growth rate when it comes to diameter deployments. I guess as you look at the market, and this is for Greg, I guess what do you see as driving that growth today, and what do you think will be driving that growth, I guess, going through 2016 when you look at the market from the numbers that you showed there?
Well, I think we saw the market sort of inflect a little bit, and it's because of operators in Asia starting to get ready for VoLTE. I think that Chinese vendors are starting to Chinese operators, I'm sorry, trying to invest a little bit more, and then just, that notwithstanding, other parts of the world, operators, I think, are getting ready for VoLTE. So that's the primary thing, is making sure that they have their diameter edge agent available for when they do start roaming, and that's really why we've started to see a bit of an uptick. Whereas before, if we were to look back at 2013, the market was pretty heavily weighted toward North America, as the operators here were a little bit ahead of others in deploying LTE, and then buying well in advance of demand for VoLTE.
Yeah, interesting. Maybe, I guess on another topic too. I mean, obviously, I know Bill, you kind of mentioned in your presentation there. Again, the SS7 angle of this, and I got to say, as I was working on the story, I went into it kind of hoping to focus mostly on diameter, but in talking to the vendors and the analysts and some of the carriers out there, it did seem like SS7 was still a big part of this. And I guess as you look at that market, I guess should we be surprised by this continued need for SS7? And it seems like again, it's like a somewhat of a legacy technology, but again, it does seem like there are still use cases, and there still is need for this. I guess should we be at all surprised by this continued need, and I guess need to upgrade these SS7 platforms out there?
No, I don't think we should be surprised all that much. Maybe we're surprised as an industry because we all got caught up in kind of the diameter hype cycle that naturally happens.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a natural effect. Where really the SS7 network, in the future really starts to decline from a use perspective, is when VoLTE really catches hold from a large percentage standpoint of overall mobile connections. We saw here, LTE had really started in 2009, 2010, and has had like a 5-year head start on VoLTE. And then VoLTE has really started here in like 2014 to 2015. And so, yeah, is the compound annual growth, is it hard? Absolutely, yes. Like when you're starting, from close to 0 or low single digits, it's going to take a long while to catch up. And we're in the mobile world. You can go to various websites and take a look at the total number of mobile connections, and you can, it's like the debt sort of counters. They're going up and up and up. And I think the latest numbers I saw was over 7 billion connections across different types of use cases. So even if you're running really fast to catch up, it's going to still take you a while to get there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I don't know, Kevin, if maybe, I guess, I know you guys, obviously been following the space and have been around for quite some time. Is there any surprise from you guys in terms of this continued need for SS7 support as well?
Not particularly. No surprises there. Remember that Ulticom was a very, very significant player in the signaling gateway space, if you will. So long history there in terms of exposure to the demand and sort of prospects for SS7 infrastructure. Like you mentioned before, there's still an awful lot of 2G, 3G deployed out there, especially around a lot of the machine-to-machine applications. A lot of that stuff has been embedded into the field, with a life duration expected anywhere from 7 to 12 years or so. So I think over time you will see that start to work its way down the long tail, as Bill put it. But over time, the LTE-based solutions will certainly dominate.
Yeah, good insight there. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I guess I was the only one who was surprised by all that, so I guess I'll be the one person. But anyway, so moving on to that, we got some questions coming in from some of our those in the audience there. Definitely appreciate those, and if you have any more questions, feel free to send those in using the questions tab there on the GoToWebinar control panel. The ones we don't get to, we will share them with our panel members for some potential follow-up afterwards too. But one of the questions that came in, I want to get to this one here. The person's asking about, I think about Greg's numbers, looking at the subscription expectations for LTE, more than 8 billion. I guess they're looking at, asking if that includes IoT and MTM connections. And I guess, how do we count those? I know there's been, talk from a lot of vendors in terms of what they expect in terms of, kind of those, the connected everything type of world that we're going to be moving towards. But I guess as we look towards LTE, do we expect a lot of those to be, LTE connections, 3G connections? I guess what's your view, Greg, on kind of, how those might fit into the overall number of LTE going forward?
Yeah, great question. And so the numbers that I have are sort of subscriptions. So it wouldn't include IoT. So, I'm sure people have seen the projections, the 50 billion connections or 20 billion or whatever that is. So obviously my numbers would not include those. And it's an interesting, it's an interesting concept when you have an industry that's been so focused on what's an ARPU, and a subscriber or subscription is correlated with an ARPU. Well, with IoT, it's a different model, and I think that's so. I guess that's a long answer to no. It doesn't include IoT.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and again, like, I mean, you're right. I mean, as you look at the market now, it does seem like it's changing so much. I mean, and it seems like that's almost a big part of what Diameter is going to have to provide is, you know, these are going to be changing billing models and you know, service models, and so operators are going to have to really need platforms in place to kind of handle what's going to be, you know, again, not just a general, you know, send out a bill each month to a customer and expect, you know, $50 in ARPU every month. It's a different model now where, you know, cost of acquisitions will be much lower, but the revenue coming in will be much lower as well. So that whole market, as we look at IoT and M2M, it's just, yeah, I mean, it's still, I think, a lot of carriers and a lot of markets are still trying to get their head around what that's going to mean, and a lot of them, you know, are having to kind of juggle the financial community, which, you know, are going to have to kind of be, you know, thought along the process as well, because there will be a change there in terms of how they're going to look at that. So that's going to be
and that's why. Yeah, that's why NFV is so important too, because you have all of these additional billions of connections coming online, and you need an economic way for the network to accommodate it. And you know, NFV and virtualization seem to be you know, an excellent solution to or an enabler to this trend toward IoT.
Yeah, definitely some potential there for some cost savings. So yeah, good point. Another question I want to get to from our audience, we got some good ones coming in here, and this one I think will probably geared towards Bill and to Kevin, but someone's asking about, you know, what are the most important features a carrier should consider in purchasing a digital diameter signaling controller? Maybe for Bill, you know, what's, you know, if someone were to come to you and ask you kind of what's that one main product or one main feature that they should be looking at, what would you say is the one that they should be kind of considering in their purchasing decisions?
Sure. So you know, the feedback we get from actual customers is the most important aspect to it is the flexibility of dealing with you know, I would call them you know, diameter interop issues. And so, you know, there's various diameter standards out there, and we all know that, you know, all standards are not created equal, and not all people implement the standards exactly sort of as expected. And you have variations in you know, what people do, different 3GPP spec versions. And having a very flexible product to handle those interop issues of either rolling out a new software version or adding a new vendor into your network is a key aspect of what a diameter controller is supposed to do. And most of our customers we talk to is, you know, our flexibility really shines there, and so, you know, we get kind of gold stars there. The other aspect is the inner working. You know, that's a key aspect for customers to allow, you know, mobile phones roaming. Either, you know, within country sort of perspective and rolling over to a 3G partner, or, you know, roaming around the world and allowing those, you know, 4G phones to roam into networks. And then obviously, you know, we've been promoting and you know, maybe surprising you a little bit on the, you know, the SS7 legacy. These networks are going to evolve. It's not going to be kind of a revolution. It'll be an evolution. And you know, you want to be able to invest in a platform, in a solution that can evolve as your network does. And so 4G and LTE is growing quite rapidly, so you want to be able to do that. And you know, maybe like you indicated there, having an NFV part basically is a good solution. And also you have to kind of, you know, protect the legacy and make sure that stays up and working, because at the end of the day, a lot of these things are still keeping the lights on and paying the bills.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's obviously, I know I talked to a lot of carriers about, you know, kind of the move towards virtualization, and yeah, that's always a concern. Is there's still networks out there that are working and like you said, paying the bills, keeping the lights on. So that's an important part to continue to support. But yeah, maybe from Kevin, what's, I guess, you know, as you look at the market, what would you say is kind of maybe a big important part that I guess carriers should look at when considering DSC?
So two common threads here. Primarily, architecture really counts. Designing preferably a software-based product from the get-go, one that is designed for robustness and scale, massive scale, and optimally one that is ready to go to be virtualized. That seems to be the dominant question that we hear from our mobile customers, mobile operators. The other second thing here kind of really echoes what Bill was saying, and that deals with a scriptability capability, being able to handle AVT correction, and do remember that diameter was defined as a protocol that was permitted to be extended by implementers, right? It was AVTs that are proprietary to the implementation. That's perfectly allowable. However, you need to have the ability to strip them, purge them, translate them, morph them, adapt them as needed. And through a very powerful, flexible scripting capability, we found that to be an absolute must-have capability. It's something that you can do under heavy load without impacting your performance profile.
Interesting. Okay, makes sense. All right. That sounds good. We got so many more questions coming in here. I'm going to get to some that we already had planned as well too. So maybe jumping down a few there. And this is something again I kind of brought up. I thought I was going to bring up quite a bit in the report. Was kind of looking at the VoLTE aspect of it. But again, I guess maybe for Greg, I'm not sure how in depth your view is into kind of how these platforms are being deployed and how robust they are. But I mean, how confident should everyone be that what's available out there will be able to handle this growing you look at the chart that you provide. I mean, this growing need for traffic coming on the network, or the growing traffic on the network. For those to be able to support for diameter platforms to be able to support this growing traffic demand, whether it's VoLTE or IoT. I guess what's your view on how confident people should be in those platforms right now?
So I've been tracking the market for a few years now, and when I first started, there was a lot of fear about signaling storms and bringing networks down, and when that happens, it appears on it'll appear on the national news sometimes, so it's a big deal. These days, I don't hear about it too much anymore, about signaling storms. I hear about security issues and some of the things that Kevin and Bill mentioned before about the really key concerns for operators. So I know that it is a big concern, and within networks, but again, I don't get the sense that that operators are they're losing sleep over this. They're losing sleep over, I think, security more than that signaling storms are going to bring their network down.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess you have to kind of balance out what's going to get them more national headlines, whether it's a security issue or a network going down issue. So but I guess you're right. Security probably, or something else.
Yeah.
So, who knows? Yeah, interesting. Well, I guess maybe from Bill and Kevin too. I mean, obviously, I know you guys are vendors in the space, so I'm sure you're pretty confident in your own platforms. But I guess maybe quickly from you guys, how should carriers be concerned, or do you think that the platforms that are out there, maybe in a vacuum are powerful enough, or is it more of a concern about interruptibility issues and different things like that they should be concerned about? Maybe from Bill, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think from the sort of the VoLTE IoT perspective, there's been enough kind of trials and actual deployments where that's less of a concern. I think the next kind of mountain to climb is really going to be a big challenge within the vendor space and the carrier space regarding essentially NFV. So this breaks down a fair amount of previous silos within operators, and basically brings together the IT portion with the networking portion. And so you're going to have a lot of reformed reorgs and that sort of thing going on, and new kind of methods of procedures and demarcs within this kind of new NFV world. So I think folks are going to start small, do something that they know they can have success with, build on that, and then over time gather momentum to have larger parts of their network handled by NFV. And you mentioned previously folks may go after a solution where they do like an overlay, where they may say, okay, the VoLTE part of my network is going to be NFV, or my IoT part of my network is going to be NFV, and this is where I'm going to kind of make my first stand and make it work. And so all depends on the economics and or timing and or capabilities of both the vendor space and the carrier itself.
Yeah, makes sense. Maybe Kevin, a quick answer from you on that as well. How do you think that the market should view, I guess, the concerns there?
I think it's very similar to lots of new elements that have been introduced, new products that have been introduced into the telecom space. Certainly, there are going to be some gotchas that people have to deal with vis-a-vis security. But But you know, the market adapts very quickly. The suppliers adapt. There's always the threat for security issues, and you want to be sure that you're working with a supplier that has lots of good experience and a good plan on how to prevent. Totally agree with Bill. I think, if anything, the suppliers are probably going to be a little bit ahead of the operator readiness in terms of virtualization and NFV. But it will. You're already seeing deployments in earnest around virtualized DSC applications.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, it looks like we are literally 5 minutes to the top of the hour here. This thing has kind of flown by us here. But before I let everybody go, I did want to get, I guess, one kind of wrap up from our three panel members, kind of looking at perhaps what they see as the biggest challenges for the vendor and carrier markets over the next, maybe over the next 12 months or so. We tend to do these diameter reports once a year, and you know, as we look towards our next report next year, what should we be looking for perhaps to happen over the next 12 months? And maybe with Greg, maybe start with you. Maybe, you know, what do you see as perhaps the biggest challenge from your viewpoint on kind of what the market and what vendor and carriers could see in the diameter space going forward the next year or so?
I think a couple things. So just continuing to you know, supply to the VoLTE deployments and voice over Wi-Fi. I think as those really start to pick up and start to snowball, I think there'll be, you know, a lot of demands on the systems as well. And then secondly, on the converged signaling, so virtualized converged signaling, where you have diameter, SS7, maybe even SIP routing, all in a single platform. I think is where a lot of the operators would like to go in the long term. So those two areas.
Okay, makes sense. Great. All right, and maybe Bill, what do you see as being the big challenge for the market there going over the next 12 months or so?
Yes, I would agree with that from an overall kind of technology projection of where things are headed from what, you know, customers are requiring. And I think we're going to move from, you know, the back room and or, you know, first science experiments of NFV with, like, you know, limited success sort of in you know, 2014, 2015, to really, you know, kind of mainstream deployment in larger portions of the network really come into play with NFV. So we're gonna move beyond kind of the early movers and move you know, much more market penetration on that front.
Makes sense. All right, virtualization, a big part of that. So that sounds good. Well, Kevin, what's your, I guess, the kind of general view looking over the next 12 months or so?
So we haven't really mentioned the acronym IMS at all. So when we talk about VoLTE, VoLTE necessarily does mean IMS, right? And for many operators, IMS is brand new for them, right? So wrap your head around this for a second. You're deploying VoLTE, which is a non-trivial technology, into a new network paradigm that you may not be totally comfortable with. You're going to start lighting up other services that ride across that IMS core, things like voice over Wi-Fi, VoLTE, video over LTE, advanced messaging. So you've got lots and lots of services now that are creating demand on that core infrastructure.